So, hi Dianne. Again, I meet you here on our YouTube little interviews that we've been doing because what people may not understand is like we've been doing all different kinds of documentaries and interviews over the last year or maybe 2 years, but we never really see the final product. And we're recording this, and it's, I think, August 14th when we're recording this. And tonight, we just found out that another documentary that we were interviewed for called Cult of Personality is debuting on the Reels channel. And we have no idea how that's going to look. We hope that I know they named us, so I know they're using, we didn't wind up on the cutting room floor. And of course they would use an interview with you because you've been just so wonderful. And people are commenting how clear you are. And people have asked me, how on earth were you able to remember details? And I'll ask you, but what I've explained is it was a very interesting and long process. We purposely kept you almost in like a bubble where you did not, right? You didn't know there were videos and books and all of that about Manson.
Well, I knew that there were some, but I had no idea how many people had jumped on this bandwagon to explore the plethora of theories and ideas that people have about what happened and how many people were connected, or is somehow, met Charlie, met Bobby, met somebody in the family. And
it's a big event. I've been reading comments on, we had the 51st anniversary of the crimes a couple of days ago, and I've been watching people's comments and posts, of course, focusing on the victims and how horrible it was. And they're also watching the show that we've been talking about, the 6-part series, Helter Skelter, an American Myth. And people who were alive at the time and of awareness, like maybe 10 years old or above, they are very aware that this was a significant event that changed things for people. And they remember it. And they remember, like when Kennedy was shot, they remember where they were. They remember when they heard it.
Yeah, when they found out about it. Yeah.
And of course, they didn't know who had done it. So it put.
But it was a shocking, It was a shocking event, especially, I think, in light of the fact that the hippie movement had gotten a lot of traction. There were a lot of people who had, turned on, tuned in, and dropped out.
Which is what I want to talk to you about, because this third episode shows Timothy Leary.
Yeah, I know.
Wasn't that cool? Tell us about what it was. People don't know what your upbringing was like. Tell us about your dad and he was probably listening in one of those speeches to Timothy Leary.
Oh, definitely. My dad listened to Allen Ginsberg, Aldous Huxley, all of that kind of ideas were coming out. And then Timothy Leary, was really the one that coined the phrase, turn on, tune in, and drop out. And at that point, my dad and my family had kind of encountered this commune called the Oracle. And they lost their lease or whatever and moved into our house. And so my dad and, a couple other guys, it's like, yeah, let's do that. Let's drop out, let's get a truck, a camp or whatever, or a bus and go.
I raised my kids early life on a sort of gentleman's farm. And I was an earth mother, new age hippie-ish. Nothing like you. Tell us about like your.
You had the safety of normalcy to do that in.
I was only like a half hour, 40 minutes from Columbus, Ohio, which is like, it was at the time, the test market city, because it was the total, middle of the road, normal. I mean,
Oh,
tell us
really?
about your dad's idea about the table and the chairs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, I wish he was still alive so that we, could delve deeper into what his mindset really was, but he made this table out of a big solid core door and had kind of curved edges, and it was a regular height table, and we sat in captain's chairs. And then, but when he started getting high, it was like he wanted to be more Zen-like. I'm not sure, there's a rumor out there that when he was on acid, the table and chairs told him, they wanted to be short.
That's what I was looking for.
I don't know if that's really what happened or not, but he did cut the table down, and then he cut the chairs down too, so that we could all sit in these they were comfortable, the old style, captain's wood chairs. And he cut them at an angle, so you were kind of, laid back.
I think we have a photo of this in our book.
We do. And,
right. Yeah.
And they showed it on the documentary. They showed
Oh
pictures.
my gosh.
They
I
showed
was so
pictures,
excited.
those pictures. They did a good job.
Get the
with that.
footage of your dad
From the Hog Farm movie. Isn't that cool?
That was the coolest thing ever, because what people don't realize.
And my sister is in that too. I mean, it's just like, because that
is the closest you have to a home movie.
The Hog Farm movie goes by really, really fast. So I watched it and I paused it like every couple of seconds because that's the only way that you could really see who was there. I couldn't find my mom. She had to have been there somewhere.
Oh yeah.
But she escaped being photographed.
Well, they show your dad
but
helping
they show my
put
dad
up the geodesic dome that you told me about when I was interviewing you for the book.
Right. Yep.
There it is.
Yep.
And what I was starting to say.
And it was his design.
Well, your dad, first I want to say.
Well, he was a big follower of Buckminster Fuller, who was the guy who developed a geodesic dome, or who honed it down.
Sacred architecture.
Yeah. Anyway, I know my dad worked really hard at it, because it was not only was it an engineering thing, but it was also a mathematical thing, and even how to put it together was, you had to do it just the right way, or the triangles wouldn't fit.
We were at the center of so many things, like front row seat. And that was also what was so interesting in writing the book with you, because we kept it purely to what you could remember. And I mean, it was hard sometimes to get you focused. I had done a lot of reading and all of that, because I needed to make sure I had the timeline and the facts. And even then, I'm sure that
it's daunting.
It was daunting. It was crazy. When we first met the director of this 6-part series, I was like, oh, you poor thing, because there are so many, rabbit holes that you can go down in trying to understand the different theories and the facts and the people, but what I love about what we did is it was really what you remembered in your experience. And you met, like, you were right there. You were at the be-ins. You were at the exact right place at the right time. You were, you had the Oracle living at your house. You were, didn't they at one point live at Frank Zappa's or something like that? Or what was that connection? The Oracle?
I think the Oracle was at this house in Laurel Canyon, and we used to go visit them there. And it was a house that had belonged to somebody. But Frank Zappa, I think, moved into it afterwards. So that's
that's the
that's
connection.
that's the connection right there, is that he'd lived in that house at some point. But I remember, you know, outside where a lot of the bands would congregate and play was like this treehouse thing. And when the first time I saw it was in a magazine, I think, or online, and I had this huge flashback. It was like, oh my gosh, that is the house.
Yeah,
That's the house that we
the Frank
used to
Zappa
go.
house.
Well, yeah, it wasn't. Frank Zappa came after, but
it was the Oracle house, and later but you could remember, and that's why I was making a comparison, because, you know,
and now I think it's burned down.
Oh goodness. But children observe all these things, and at first you were living such a mainstream life in Minnesota, and then your dad wanted to, well, sort of, but your dad was always hankering to be an
There was
artist.
always this little fringe. Yeah, he was an artist.
Yeah,
right. But he wanted to go to Berkeley. He wanted to be part of the, you know, the beatnik generation,
and the happening.
You know, yeah, that was happening in Berkeley, which really was a center for, you know, Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Timothy Leary, and this whole, you know, I think birth of the hippie movement was just,
and the psychedelic movement
was just a metamorphosis from the beatnik area. I mean, these are people that were looking for a new Aldous Huxley, you know, a new way of thinking, a new way of living.
Now,
and then you added drugs.
See, that's what I wanted to talk to you about too. When I was rewatching this third episode, there's I can't think of his name, the doctor that ran the clinic in Haight-Ashbury said, right. He said, okay, it's going to drive us crazy. So we'll just say, look it up. We'll get back to you on it. But what he said that was so interesting is, by the time Charles Manson got to San Francisco, it was starting to become more of a dark place as opposed to the happy flower child place. And there were hundreds of thousands of runaways. And, you know, he was seeing the doctor was seeing the darker side of the psychedelics, because some people were having very bad trips. But you went to Haight-Ashbury for a short time before you met Manson.
Right.
And that's kind of what caused you to ultimately meet him, because your mom told him, oh, if you see my daughter, and gave him a photograph. Tell us about that, because what you saw in Haight-Ashbury, and when you were there, and I mean, we don't go into all the detail, but that was not a happy place when you were there, and that was not a happy experience, and you got out of there.
Well, yeah, no, because I had met a man in Big Sur when I went up there with my parents after living in the spiral staircase house with, you know, Ronald and Linda. They came by after coming back from the Grand Canyon and asked me if I wanted to go with them. They were going to go to Big Sur. I said, sure, you know, so I was going to try this, you know, try living with my family again. And we went up to Big Sur, and it was beautiful and lovely. Anyway, but I met this man, Gary, in Esalen, and he invited me to go to San Francisco with him. And it appealed to me. So I went with him. And then he just kind of abandoned me at his house. Fortunately, he had a really nice house, but he sort of abandoned me there. And I knew my uncle had gone to San Francisco and was living somewhere near the Haight-Ashbury. So I took off one night, you know, Gary hadn't come home.
Leather straps on your feet and something.
I basically was barefoot. I was
You made a
barefoot,
dress
but I
out of a
had
skirt and
at a dress that was made. It was a knit skirt that had been turned into a dress. You know, like
you were a little
mini
hippie
dress.
girl.
I was a little hippie girl, definitely. You know, and the feet things, you know, was like an elastic that went around your big toe, and then a strap that went around your heel or around your ankle, and it was just felt flower. It was just a strip of felt flowers. So they looked like sandals, but I really was barefoot. Anyway, so it rains a lot in San Francisco. And I remember, you know, like it was drizzling, and I walked towards Haight-Ashbury by asking people. You know, I didn't have a map. We didn't have, you know, cell phone with GPS. So
No,
just,
which is so hard to think
which way
now.
to Haight-Ashbury, you know? And so, and then as I went along, I mean, I didn't know how big San Francisco was, right? And so, but I stopped at different apartment buildings wherever I heard music, because my uncle played the guitar. And so I would stop and listen at these doors, you know, of apartment buildings to see if it was maybe him. And I knocked on a few doors, and this one, you know, group of hippies basically, or young people, probably, you know, going to college, but playing music. They invited me in, they gave me food to eat, and no, they hadn't heard of my uncle.
That would have been a long shot.
Right.
You never know.
I mean, I'm what, 14, you know? I'm 14. What do I know? You know,
Well,
it's a new world.
Well,
anyways,
let's put it this way. We don't have to go into, we'll shift a little bit. Let's just say you were in San Francisco and you kind of escaped out of there, and you figured, and then you go back to the Hog Farm, right?
Well, I went back to Big Sur, and I think from that night, walking the streets of San Francisco in a drizzle, barefoot, I think I got pneumonia. I was I got really sick. And Gary came back from New York or wherever he'd gone, and he took me back to Big Sur and dropped me off with this couple that he knew that would, you know, take care of me, basically. And they did. I had a ginger mustard plaster, I think, on my chest for a couple of days. And yeah, they took really good care of me, but then they didn't really want me to leave. And so I ended up like,
which good for you.
I climbed over the gate and escaped with my little straw bag of stuff, and was really blessed to get a very short ride from probably a pervert, you know.
That was a blessing. Oh, you mean the fact that
it was short.
Happened.
Yeah, then he dropped me off like 3 miles down the road when I wouldn't cooperate with his, you know,
his offer.
What he wanted to do, right? And then I got a ride all the way to LA with these 3 gals from New Zealand who were writing a book, and they wanted to meet Dean Martin.
Thank you, Dean.
And I got a ride all the way from Big Sur to the Sunset Strip.
So I want to jump ahead a little bit.
That was a God thing. It really, I mean,
you have many of those.
I was really protected, and, you know, I mean, it was like a white Cadillac, you know, with these 3 beautiful girls, young women.
A movie.
I mean, like angels.
That's crazy. That's like you wrote this.
3 angels picked me up, you know, and took me down there. And I went to where, you know, Ronald worked. He and a partner had a cinema on the Sunset Strip, and I knew where that was, and I knew the name of it. And he wasn't there, but his partner was, and he took me up to his house, and Ronald and Linda had moved to the Hog Farm. And guess what? My parents did too. So that's how I ended up at the Hog Farm.
And then, you know, I want to move ahead a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about how the show is laying all of this out. And of course, there's 3 more episodes. I felt that this episode, and I don't know if you will agree, there were some repetition of things that they'd already covered. And, you know, they talked about what it was like for Manson, and they explained how he was manipulative. But we've talked quite a bit about, and I don't know if I want to touch on this too much because we really don't know what they're going to say in the final 3 episodes. But when I was watching this episode, there seemed to be a very heavy focus on Manson as a conscious con man, as opposed to what you observed, which was, it's not as simple as that. Yes, he used everything he could to manipulate people, but there was another element.
He was definitely an opportunist.
But I think what I'm getting at, and I'm sure you know what I'm getting at, is you observe, a lot of people will say, oh, how could anybody have bought into that and believed him and all of that? And what I'm wondering in this series is if they're going to touch upon what we've talked about, which is this sense that he did believe what he was saying.
Somebody that they interviewed on that last episode did say that, basically.
Oh.
They said that they thought that Charlie believed his talk.
Oh, I might have walked out of the room at that
It
point.
was brief. It was brief, but they did have somebody who said that, or something to that effect, that Charlie, kind of started to believe this stuff,
Well, because I think it's
that
really
he was.
important.
I think that he was God. They didn't say that specifically, but that he was. And I mean, but I think some of the things that Catherine said, related to that. That we, as a cult, I mean, at that time when Charlie got out of jail, people were looking for gurus.
But it made it sound.
And he kind of took on that, that thing and that aura, and people, and because of his auditory remembrance, he was able to plug in lots from the Bible and Scientology, and he wove that all into this thing. And when you're on acid and taking psychedelics and young, you're susceptible to the power of suggestion.
But I guess the fine line that I'm really going to be interested in seeing is, so let's say he's this, now people are perceiving him as a guru. He's got people wanting to follow him. He's got people listening and hanging on every word, when he was, a criminal punk, basically not even a very successful criminal from what, his record shows.
Right. Yeah.
He wasn't really good at it. And so now everybody's inflating his ego, and he is taking, the psychedelics. And what I see as happening, and I've studied different cults, is that there's a turning point where the cult leader can start to believe their own publicity, where they almost like snap. And then even if it was a game in the beginning, it becomes real to them as well as to the followers.
Right. And I think that there is a name for that.
But
a psychological context or whatever for, starting to believe in your own lies.
Well, there could be the pathological liar, and if you say it enough, it becomes truth. And then there's also the delusional, schizophrenic, paranoid, messianic. There are so many cases of people who, become messianic. And a lot of what I studied.
I think that's the piece that he believed in.
Yeah.
And that gave him license in his mind to do what he thought, you know, what he perceived as what was coming, what, you know, I
What he
think that
served.
that, huh?
Well, what was coming in terms of what he believed was the apocalypse. Okay.
Right.
Because I've seen very rational people become, as I've studied in cult behavior, seemingly rational people, they get caught up in this groupthink and things that appear to someone maybe in a more mainstream environment, where it's, to them it seems absurd. How could you believe that? But if you're in this groupthink bubble,
Right.
you can believe a lot of things, especially if
Well,
being
yeah, what about the people that took the whatever because they were gonna get right on the
Kool-Aid.
Haley,
Oh wait,
the Haley Bop?
two of them. No, they actually killed. Yeah, you've got two suicide cults.
Yeah.
And you know, how can we explain that if it's all their leaders just a you know, a con man? And I'm hoping that as people continue to watch this and study it and read about it, that they don't simplify, oversimplify how something like this happens, because that's why this is such an important story to tell. They always want to say it could never have happened to me. And
I think that's why it's endured for
Mhm.
all these years with all these rabbit holes and all these, you know, conspiracy theories and just on and on and on is because of that point. It's like, how did this happen? It would never have happened to me, but yet it did. And it's not clear cut. It's very, I mean, and there were so many aspects of culture that were changing at that point. It was kind of like a free-for-all. It was a free-for-all in what to believe, you know? Anything was, you know, the floodgate was open and anything was possible.
You didn't wake up
think,
as a you know, as a 14-year-old and say, gee, I want to go join a cult. You didn't even, I mean,
I didn't even know what a cult was.
I don't know that.
And I certainly don't think I didn't feel like I was in a cult in the Manson family until I grew up
and realized, oh, there are similarities.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't really studying it in that way at that time. You know, now there are entire studies done,
college courses,
yeah, and courses and
PhDs earning their, or you know, yeah,
because
master's degree students earning their PhDs on such stuff.
Well, because and there are really great books written about it. I mean, about the process of cult behavior. And one of the things that we've often talked about as we were unpacking all of this is, when you've got an unequal power balance in any relationship, even if it's in a marriage, whether it's the husband or the wife,
right,
depending on who's got the greater power and who's more, you know, manipulative or whatever, you can have something that mimics being in a cult. You see that with battered wife syndrome or battered husband syndrome. I don't want to, you know,
separate them from family and, you know, control all their movements and yeah.
Right. The isolation, the bubble of information. You only get your information from me. The threat, you know, you were always under constant threat because he was so unpredictable. You didn't know if you were going to get, you know, kissed or slammed.
Slapped.
And slapped. And he was violent with you.
Yeah.
And yet he made you think that that you needed that.
I deserved it. Yeah.
Yes.
Or that I was being made an example for the rest and that I could take it, or what, you know, yeah.
And part of the reason I wanted us to, you know, talk about the show and talk more about the book in ways that that we don't necessarily get to do is because I personally want to raise awareness that these things happen every day. And people on the outside like to point fingers and say, well, why didn't that woman just leave the husband who was beating her?
Easier said than done.
It's not easy. Like, why didn't you just leave Charles Manson? Now, let's talk before you were in the desert when you couldn't leave. But, you know, he beat you. Why didn't you just leave? Rhetorical
Where was
question.
I going to go? Where was I going to go? I mean, most of the time I didn't even know where my parents were.
And plus you were really into Charlie speak.
Right.
Even when you did get away.
Oh, yeah. I did get away, and it just, you know, my brain was just running all his songs, you know, living in the garbage dump and, you know, get your game on and all of these things. And I just felt, you know, when I was taken out of that context, it made me feel crazy.
Yeah.
And in such a way that I just wanted to go back because that felt normal. Where, you know, where I was out of the family briefly, and I was with my mom and dad, although my mom now had a new husband, and there were all these other kids, so there were extenuating circumstances. But I didn't feel enfolded. I just felt like, oh, these, you know, because of Charlie's indoctrination about separating from family, forget your family, blah, blah, blah.
He used everything.
That it made me just feel like a fish out of water. And I wanted to get back to where my thoughts felt normal.
Exactly. You know? Even though down was up and up was down. So I want to end this now. We're going to do another one after the next episode because I'm having fun and I like seeing you and talking about these things because, again, in a more casual way. It's been a while now since we wrote the book, and we've had people asking us questions, so we kind of know what's on people's minds, and we've had time to examine things. You know, I do want people to know that you never told your story for 47 years. Your husband knew when you married him, but you met him after the second trial, Leslie Van Houten's trial, correct? There were 2 trials. You met him after. He knew right up front what you had done, who you were. But then you went on and you had an entirely different life as, you know, church-going mom. You know, you raised children, you taught autistic children, you got a master's degree, and you really were able to be separated from that part of your life until your husband died. And then it was, oh my God, I've got to do something. You know, that's what it is when you bury a secret for so long.
Yeah.
You know?
I didn't have anything else to hang my hat on, really, except I was grieving, you know, and in that process of trying to find my new self, you know, or my new anchor, is when I had this epiphany in it was Brendan Bouchard's, you know, High Performance Academy. So it's all about personal development. And that's why I went there. And he took us through this exercise where I had this epiphany that, oh, now is maybe the time that I should write my story or tell my story. And so, you know, I got a life coach, and she coached me through, you know, I never met her in person. It was just a telephone call every week. And she had me writing down basically what amounted to my chronological memories, you know, of what had happened.
I think,
and at the end of that, it was like, okay, you know, this isn't a book.
Well, but there's something else I want you to pick up on and feel. We went through a very personal journey together, and thank goodness, you know, we became instant friends, and we really trusted each other. And I had a real sense that this was something sacred, to take someone through such a deeply traumatic experience. But you had lost your husband and you were grieving, because it wasn't that long after when you started this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a way, writing this book took you through the grief of that lost little girl. And that's where we ended up.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
And I really felt like God opened up all the doors. I mean, taking me to this high performance academy, meeting and getting the idea, and at that point had the funds where I could afford, a life coach to kind of support me, and encourage me through this process. And then, then it came to meeting you, and I just felt like God opened up all the doors.
That was certainly.
I felt really that God wanted me to write this, maybe not write the story. Ultimately, that was the vehicle, but to tell my story.
I'm really happy.
And to integrate those different parts of me, because I had told a few people, and either they kind of shunned me or didn't believe me. It was like, oh, she's exaggerating, I never heard of her, and exaggerating it. And then other people were trying to write my story for me without ever contacting me. So it just felt on a lot of different areas that it needed to be done.
And if you watching you now on the different documentaries, there's so much confidence and strength and clarity, and I think that's another thing I want people to take away from the book and from hearing you speak in our little, chats that we're doing is that you can move beyond something highly traumatic. You can move beyond your personal shame. God obviously wanted you to heal. So it's not like you were, judged so harshly by association. Yeah, that was a really horrible thing. But you were a 14-year-old child. You were a victim too. You were not part of, you never.
And that's hard. You don't, people either like revel in being a victim, or they, I can't, I'm not a victim. I can't be a victim, and that's really kind of where I was. I kind of abhorred the idea of being a victim. And it took the process of really writing this book and delving into my past and what my relationship with Charles Manson was, or how I perceived it, or how we unburied it. I was a victim. I came to see that I was a victim.
Always been accountable. You have always held yourself accountable for what you may feel.
My choices. I felt
no, maybe I shouldn't have quite done that. I understand why I did, but you've never tried to, say, oh, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. You've been so straightforward, and, you've had people who have really judged you, but you only have to face one being, two beings, God and yourself. And again, I'm going to end this with saying it's really brave, because people are afraid to speak their truth and to face themselves and to forgive themselves. And you were a little girl, and now you're a grown woman, and you're standing for something really important. And I'm happy.
Thank you.
Well,
I hope that, I hope this message does get across, because there are a lot of people suffering under shame, and they don't want to be associated with horror. There's a lot of horribleness in the world, and people get caught up in it, and then if they come out of it, they don't want to share. They don't want anybody to know they were associated with whoever it is that they're ashamed.
People who are recovering from addiction, who are
even alcoholism is.
God loves us, and we're expected on this earth that we're going to be making some pretty bad mistakes, especially in our search for God's love, and what people do is they think that they're beyond redemption and they hate themselves. And that's not the message, you know?
No.
And that's
No, and
why
he's right there behind us, you know, he's
all the
knocking,
time.
knock, knock, knocking all the
Yeah,
time.
turn
But
around, I'm
we
here.
don't always recognize that.
No.
You know, we don't understand that. And through some of the hard times, he carried us, you know, he carried
Absolutely.
us,
No.
he carried us. And I feel like he did carry me through some bad stuff.
Well, there's
you
no
know?
other explanation.
Nope.
I read your story. I mean, I wrote your story with you. No, there's
Yeah.
no other explanation. You certainly survived in ways, especially with your sanity and with your goodness. And those are two things that Mr. Manson was unable to take from you. So until next time, if our listeners are interested in either Member of the Family or Inside the Manson Jury, two really great and factual books about what really happened. One is about the trial, and one, of course, is Dianne's amazing and heartwarming story, very factual and real. You can get them wherever books are sold or on bookstopia.store, which is my new baby. It's a great independent online bookstore that's fun, and hope to see you there. So thank you for listening. We took a lot of time, but we really wanted to cover some subjects, and we'll see you all again. Let's do it again next week. What do you think, Dianne?
Yeah.
Okay, see ya.
I can. All right.
Yeah, bye.
Bye now.